My name is Jackson Palmer. I'm 34 years old, and I'm the kind of person who runs toward fire for a living. Wildland fires, structure fires, brush fires creeping through the sage east of Reno. I've seen them all. But nothing in my years of training prepared me for what I found behind that closet door. My parents hadn't answered the phone in 7 days. Not a text, not a voicemail callback, nothing. So I drove to their house on a Tuesday afternoon, and the front door was unlocked. Inside, every drawer was pulled open. The couch cushions were slashed. There was a faint smell of gasoline near the garage, and the kitchen table was flipped on its side. I was reaching for my phone to dial 911 when I heard it. A small scratching sound from the hallway closet. I opened it. My 5-year-old nephew Jaden was curled around a stuffed bear, shaking so hard his teeth clicked. He looked up at me with red-rimmed eyes and whispered one sentence: "Don't let Daddy come back." What my brother had done, what my parents had been hiding for 5 years, would take me 2 weeks to piece together. And every single piece was worse than the last. Welcome back to Calm Drama Stories, where every story is a slow burn that stays with you long after the screen goes dark. If you've ever been the one in your family who spoke up and got punished for it, this one's going to feel personal. Drop a comment and be sure to subscribe. Training is a strange thing. You don't feel it working until the moment you need it. I knelt beside Jaden, checked his pupils, felt his forehead. Warm, not feverish. Dehydrated. His lips were cracked and his skin tented when I pinched the back of his hand. No bruises, no cuts. I wrapped him in the fleece blanket from the back of the couch, one of the only things still in its right place, and carried him to the kitchen sink. "Small sips, buddy. Just small sips." He drank like he'd been waiting for permission. While he sat on the counter holding his cup with both hands, I called 911 and gave the basics. Abandoned child, missing adults, home ransacked. Not a burglary. The television was still mounted. The laptop was still on the desk. Whoever tore this place apart wasn't looking for electronics. They were looking for paper. The filing cabinet by my father's desk had been pried open with something flat. A screwdriver, maybe. Every folder was pulled out, contents scattered across the carpet. I picked up a few pages. Property tax statements, auto insurance, a copy of the mortgage. Somebody wanted documents. I found a pad of paper and some crayons in the junk drawer and set them in front of Jaden. He picked up a brown crayon and started drawing without a word. Steady lines, no hesitation. This child was used to keeping himself company. 2 officers arrived within 12 minutes. I explained the situation. They called CPS. The caseworker asked if any family member could take temporary emergency placement. I said yes, before she finished the question. Jaden hadn't looked up from his drawing the entire time. I drove Jaden to my apartment in Sun Valley, 20 minutes north of downtown Reno. 1 bedroom, clean, not much in the fridge. I made him a peanut butter sandwich and he fell asleep on the couch before he finished the second half. I sat at the kitchen table and scrolled through my phone. 14 calls to Mom over the past 7 days. Every single one went to voicemail after the 4th ring, which meant the phone was on. She saw my name. She chose not to pick up. That was a pattern I recognized. I grew up in that house on Ralston Street. Dad worked as a mechanic at the Chevrolet dealership on Keatskey Lane. Mom was a receptionist at a dental office on Plum. Ordinary life, ordinary family. I enlisted in the Army at 18. Not because I was running from anything, but because I wanted to carry my own weight. 4 years. 1 deployment to Helmand, combat medic. When I came back to Reno, I joined the Nevada Division of Forestry as a wildland firefighter. Good work. Honest work. The kind that wears you out in the right way. My younger brother Dylan was 5 years behind me. He stayed. Played football at UNR until a torn ACL ended his sophomore season. Lost his scholarship, dropped out, started spending evenings at the Pepper Mill, then the Atlantis, then wherever would let him sit at a table. By the time I noticed the damage, my parents were already underwater. The last real conversation I had with Mom was 3 weeks before I found Jaden. She called on a Sunday. We talked about the weather, her garden, a recipe she'd tried. Normal things. She said Dylan was doing better. Working again. Everything's fine, Jackson. Her voice shook on the word fine. I told myself it was just the connection. 5 years. That's how long the bleeding had been going on, and for most of it, I was catching the story in pieces. A missed detail here, a half-truth there. All of it filtered through my mother's talent for making catastrophe sound manageable. It started with the knee. Dylan's scholarship gone, his football career finished at 20, and he was bitter in a way that settled into his bones. My parents covered his surgery and rehab out of pocket. $14,000. That part made sense. Your kid gets hurt? You help. Nobody questions that. 6 months later, Dylan hadn't looked for work. He'd found a seat at a blackjack table at the pepper mill and convinced himself he had a system. My father told me this part later, years after it mattered. The first real debt was $8,000. Dylan came to the house at 2 a.m, woke my mother, and told her the men he owed would hurt him if he didn't pay by Friday. Lorraine pulled $8,000 from their joint savings, money earmarked for the roof that had been leaking since 2019. She told my father it was for car repairs. And when I called the following week and asked how things were, she said, "He just needs one more chance." That phrase, I'd hear it a dozen more times over the next 3 years, each time with a higher price tag attached. 1 year later, Dylan owed $25,000. My father took out an equity loan on the house, $40,000, with $25,000 going straight to Dylan's creditors and the rest supposedly set aside for emergencies. Mom sold her mother's pearl brooch at a pawn shop on East 4th Street. She told me she'd misplaced it. I believed her because I wanted to, and because I was fighting fires 300 miles away in the Toyabe Range and didn't have the bandwidth to interrogate my own mother. 2 years before I found Jaden in that closet, I organized an intervention. I'd done the research, called the Reno Problem Gambling Center and asked for a counselor who specialized in family sessions. Her name was Dr. Tessa Marsh, and she met me at a coffee shop on South Virginia to prep. She said the same thing every counselor says. If the family isn't unified, the intervention won't hold. I told her the family would be unified. I was wrong. My mother called Dylan before we started, told him what was happening, told him, "Just come so your brother stops worrying." So Dylan arrived 40 minutes late, sat down at the dining table where Dr. Marsh and I and my father were waiting, and listened for exactly 10 minutes before pushing his chair back. "You don't get to judge me, Jackson. You left this family." He looked at our mother. "I'll be fine, Mom. I just need time." Then he walked out the front door and drove away, in a car I later learned he'd borrowed from a man named Garrett Boone. Dr. Marsh looked at me with the expression of someone who'd seen this exact scene 100 times. "Without family alignment," she said, "he'll treat your concern as an attack, and her protection as permission." She was right. I called the Nevada Gambling Addiction Hotline that night and asked about involuntary treatment. The answer was simple and terrible. Nevada's involuntary commitment statutes cover substance abuse. Gambling doesn't qualify. There was no legal mechanism to force Dylan into treatment if he refused. And with my mother shielding him, he'd always refuse. I offered to pay for residential treatment at Mountain View. Dylan laughed. "I don't need rehab. I need one good night." Mom said, "See, he doesn't want to go. You can't force your brother." I couldn't. She was right about that. She was wrong about everything else. The year before the closet, I lost everything that looked like a support system. It happened in stages, the way most collapses do. Not a single blow, but a sequence of small fractures until the structure just gave. My weekly calls to Mom became arguments. Every time I mentioned Dylan, she'd go cold. "You call to check up on your brother, not to talk to me." I'd say I was calling because I loved her. She'd say if I really loved her, I'd stop trying to tear the family apart. One night I said, "If Dylan doesn't stop, you and Dad are going to lose the house." She hung up. Didn't answer for 3 months. My father called once during that silence, keeping his voice low like he was hiding in the garage. "Give your mother time, son. You know how she is. I knew exactly how she was. That was the problem. My marriage ended in the same stretch. Sarah filed in October. She was fair about it. No drama, no cruelty, just a woman who'd reached the end of something she couldn't name. She said, "You carry everyone else's weight, Jackson, but you won't let anyone carry yours." She was right, and I didn't know how to fix it in time. The divorce finalized in January. I moved into the Sun Valley apartment. 1 bedroom, no pictures on the walls. I worked. I came home. I ate dinner standing at the kitchen counter. Eventually, Mom started calling again. Short calls, light topics, weather, cooking, church gossip. Never Dylan. I accepted the surface because the alternative was silence, and silence from your own mother is its own kind of cold. The morning after I brought Jaden home, I drove back to Ralston Street. Different light now. Sunshine through the broken blinds, dust floating in the kitchen. The damage was clearer. Cabinet doors ripped off hinges. Photo frames on the hallway wall knocked sideways. One picture of our family. All 4 of us at Pyramid Lake, Dylan maybe 8, me 13, was cracked straight through the middle. I stepped outside and nearly walked into Ruth Calloway. She lived next door, had for 30 years. 71, widowed, former ER nurse at Renown. The kind of woman who noticed everything and said nothing unless asked. "I was wondering when you'd show up," she said. She told me what she'd seen. A black Chevrolet Silverado parked in the driveway last Tuesday around 11 at night. 2 men went inside. She heard shouting, male voices, more than one. Banging. Something heavy hitting the floor. It lasted maybe 20 minutes. Then the Silverado left. After that night, Ruth said, I didn't see your parents, but the kitchen light was on the next day, and the day after. I figured someone was inside, so I left a bag of groceries by the front door. Bread, peanut butter, some juice boxes. She'd kept Jaden alive without knowing it. I wrote down her description of the truck. Black Silverado, chrome running boards, loud exhaust. Dylan didn't own a truck like that. I went back inside, walked the house one more time. Garage door was ajar. On the concrete floor near my father's workbench, an empty gasoline can lay on its side. That same smell from yesterday. Sharper now, closer to the source. Someone had been careless, or someone didn't care. Detective Luis Morales from Reno PD returned my call around 4 that afternoon. Professional, unhurried. The kind of calm that told me he handled cases like mine every week. We've filed the missing persons report, he said, but there's no evidence of abduction. No blood, no forced entry from outside. The ransacking suggests a domestic dispute. Your parents may have left voluntarily. I understood what he was saying. 2 adults who leave their own home aren't a priority. I told him about Jaden, about the CPS placement, about the Silverado. He took notes. We'll look into it. These things take time. I thanked him and hung up. Then I sat in my truck in the driveway and made a different call. Tony Vargas. We'd served together in Helmand. He was a 68W like me, combat medic, except Tony had a gift for finding things. After discharge, he'd landed in the bail bond business in Sparks, which meant he had access to databases and contacts that a regular person didn't. I need to find out who drives a black Chevy Silverado in the Sparks Reno area. Chrome running boards. Loud V8. Tony. That's half the trucks in Washoe County. This one parks near casinos and shows up at houses late at night. A pause. Give me a day. That night, I put Jaden to bed on the couch with a fresh blanket and a nightlight I bought at the Dollar Tree on my way home. He asked me to leave the bathroom light on. I did. I sat at the kitchen table with a legal pad and wrote down everything I knew in one column and everything I didn't know in another. The second column was longer. Tony called back at 9:43. Name's Garrett Boone. You don't want to tangle with this guy. Tony gave me the outline. Garrett Boone, 45, owner of Gold Strike Pawn on B Street in Sparks, right by the railroad tracks. The shop was legitimate. Licensed, inspected, nothing on record. But behind the counter, Garrett ran a lending operation for gamblers who'd maxed out their credit and their family's patience. Not a loan shark in the movie sense. No baseball bats. No threats of broken kneecaps. Garrett was more surgical than that. He charged 30% interest on short-term loans, took personal property as collateral, and when payments stopped, he applied pressure. Slow, steady, suffocating pressure. Phone calls at midnight, showing up at workplaces, parking his Silverado outside someone's house and just sitting there, waiting. He doesn't touch people, Tony said. He doesn't have to. The people he lends to are already scared. He just makes them more scared. I asked the obvious question. How deep is Dylan in with this guy? If Boone is driving to your parents' house personally, the number has more than 4 digits. Garrett doesn't leave his shop for small debts. The next afternoon I drove to Sparks. Found Gold Strike Pawn on a strip between a tire shop and a vape store. Neon sign in the window, bars on the glass. I stayed in my truck across the street. Didn't go in. I wasn't there to confront anybody. I was there to confirm. And within 8 minutes, I saw it. A black Chevrolet Silverado with chrome running boards pulling around to the back lot. Same truck Ruth described. I wrote down the plate number and compared it to what Ruth remembered. Match. I gripped the steering wheel and reminded myself of something my captain told me on my first wildfire. Don't enter a structure you haven't sized up. Rushing in is how people die. 8 months before the closet, I ran into Dylan at the Walmart on North McCarran. Literally ran into him. Rounded the corner in the cereal aisle, and there he was, holding a box of Frosted Flakes like a man who'd forgotten what he walked in for. He was thinner than the last time I'd seen him. Cheekbones sharper. Dark circles under his eyes that looked permanent. But he smiled wide when he saw me. Jackson. Hey. We stood in that aisle for 10 minutes. He told me he was doing better. Working some jobs. Freelance stuff, he said, which could mean anything from drywall to disaster. I asked where. He waved his hand. Around. Then I said what I always said. Dylan, Mom told me you're working again. Is that true? The smile dropped. His jaw set. And you're still the same guy who thinks he knows better than everybody. You left, Jackson. You enlisted and you left. And I stayed. I was the one here when Dad got sick. I was the one who drove Mom to her appointments. They chose me because I was present. So don't come to me with your disappointed big brother routine. I told him I wouldn't give him money. His eyes flickered. A quick calculation. Discarded. I never asked for your money. He turned to walk away, then stopped. Looked back over his shoulder. You don't walk away from family, Jackson. Remember that. He said it like a warning. Like he'd rehearsed it. I watched him walk to the register with nothing but the cereal and a 12-pack of energy drinks, and I noticed something I couldn't unsee. His hands were shaking. Not from anger. From the specific, involuntary tremor of a man whose body has learned to expect adrenaline on a schedule. The eyes I'd seen in the parking lot light weren't defiant. They were terrified. Tony pulled public records the next day. The mortgage on my parents' house showed 2 liens. The first was the equity loan I already knew about. $40,000, taken 3 years prior. But underneath it was a second. $30,000. Opened 14 months ago. I had no idea. Nobody told me. My parents had leveraged their home for $70,000 total against a property that was worth maybe $280,000 on a good day. $70,000, and I was willing to bet every cent of it had gone to fund my brother's seat at a card table. I texted my father, kept it simple. Dad, I found out about the second lien. I'm not angry. I need to know where you and Mom are. Jaden is safe with me. I watched the screen. The message delivered. Then, read. 2 blue check marks. No reply. I texted again. Where is Mom's wedding ring? Read. No reply. I sat with that silence for a long time. At the kitchen table, Jaden was drawing again. I'd been giving him paper and crayons every morning. It was the only thing that settled him. He drew the same picture over and over. A house, brown walls, a triangle roof. No door. Two tall figures standing outside the house with their arms at their sides, not waving, not reaching, just standing there. I asked him once, gently, who the people were. He shrugged. Them. I looked at the picture again. A house with no way in, two adults locked out, or maybe a child locked inside. On the fifth night, Jaden started talking. Not a flood. A slow drip, between bites of macaroni and cheese, between sips of juice, between long silences where he stared at the refrigerator like it might tell him what to say next. I didn't push. You learn that in the field. A person in shock gives information on their timeline, not yours. Grandma cried a lot, he said, fork scraping the bowl. Before the man came. I kept my voice level. Which man, buddy? The one with the loud truck. Garrett. What happened when the truck man came? Jaden chewed, swallowed. Daddy said Grandma had something he needed, a paper. Grandma said no. Daddy threw the lamp. He said it matter-of-factly, the way children describe violence they don't fully understand yet, like reporting the weather. I gripped the edge of the counter and kept my face neutral. Then what happened? Daddy looked in all the drawers. He pulled everything out. The truck man walked around the house real slow. He talked quiet. Jaden looked up. That was scarier, when somebody talks quiet and you can still hear them everywhere. I poured him more juice. Waited. Grandpa told me to go in my room, but I went to the closet. The closet has a lock inside. A closet with an interior lock. My father had installed that years ago when Jaden used to play hide-and-seek. A playful addition that became a survival mechanism. I closed the door, Jaden said. I could hear Daddy yelling. Then, quieter. Grandpa wrote something. He put it in the box in the dark room. The dark room. My father's corner of the garage where the overhead light had been burned out for a decade and he'd never replaced it. The box. I stood there in my kitchen, watching a 5-year-old piece together the worst night of his life between bites of macaroni and cheese. And I thought, this is what happens when love has no limits and no spine. When you shield someone from every consequence until the consequences come for everyone else instead. If that thought just hit a nerve, if you've been the one screaming into the silence while your family smiled, stay with me. This story isn't done yet. I drove to Ralston Street the next morning while Jaden was with Ruth. She'd offered to watch him. CPS had approved her as a temporary caregiver after a quick background check, which for a 71-year-old retired ER nurse with no record and a 40-year residency was a formality. The garage was dim. I found the box where it had always been, a gray steel lockbox under the workbench, half hidden behind a stack of old paint cans. Combination lock. 4 digits. I tried my father's birthday. Wrong. My mother's birthday. Wrong. I stood there in the dark, smelling gasoline from that spilled can, and thought about what a man hides in a box he doesn't want anyone else to open. I tried my own birthday. 0317. March 17th. The lock clicked. He'd used my birthday. Not Dylan's. Mine. Inside, a stack of pawn shop receipts held together with a rubber band. 7 of them, all from Gold Strike Pawn in Sparks. The first was my mother's wedding ring, $1,800. Then her mother's brooch, $600. My father's vintage Seiko watch, the one he'd worn every day for 30 years, $400. Costume jewelry, a silver tea set, a pair of pearl earrings that had been my grandmother's. Total, just over $4,000 in family heirlooms, converted to cash at a pawn shop owned by the man who was bleeding them dry. Beneath the receipts, 3 handwritten IOS, my father's cramped script, all addressed to Garrett Boone. $15,000 total, signed on behalf of Dylan Palmer. 8 months, 5 months, and 2 months ago. And at the bottom, a single sheet of lined paper, folded twice. My father's handwriting, shakier than usual. Jackson, if you're reading this, things have gone bad. Your mother won't call you because she's ashamed. I won't call you because she told me not to. Dylan owes Boone more than we can cover. I don't know what happens next. The storage unit on Glendale has the rest. Key is taped under the toolbox lid. I'm sorry, son. I should have listened to you. My hands didn't shake because I was scared. They shook because I was angry. My father knew. He knew everything. And he still didn't call. The key was exactly where he said it would be, taped to the underside of the toolbox lid with a strip of electrical tape. Small brass key, the kind you get at a self-storage place. Storage Stars on Glendale Avenue, 10 minutes from the house. I found the unit in the back row. 5x5, concrete floor, fluorescent tube buzzing overhead. 2 cardboard boxes and nothing else. The first box held credit card statements. 4 cards. All in Dylan's name. All with the billing address listed as my parents' house on Ralston Street. Combined balances, $48,000. Maxed out. Minimum payments missed for months. Letters from collection agencies folded inside. Dylan had been using our parents' address like a forwarding station for his failures. The second box was worse. A manila folder from Garrett Boone, labeled D. Palmer, active, containing what Garrett called an informal lending agreement. $35,000 at 30% annual interest. Due date, 2 months ago. A handwritten note in red pen at the bottom. Payment overdue. Resolution required. I did the math on the floor of that storage unit. $70,000 in home equity, $48,000 in credit cards, $35,000 to Garrett, $4,000 in pawned heirlooms, $157,000. My brother had consumed $157,000 in 5 years, and my parents had helped him do it. Dollar by dollar, lie by lie, chance after chance after chance. I sat on the cold concrete and stared at the buzzing light and thought about the day I enlisted. I was 18. I'd told my parents I didn't want to be a burden. I wanted to earn my own way. I drove to Kabul and came home to this. I drove to the office depot on Keatska Lane and photocopied every document. Originals went into plastic sheet protectors. I bought a fireproof lockbox, $70, and stored everything in my apartment closet. Then I called Detective Morales. I have evidence, I said. Physical documents, pawn receipts, IOUs, credit card statements, and a handwritten letter from my father describing coercion by a man named Garrett Boone. Morales was quiet for a beat. Bring them in. I sat across from him at his desk at the Reno PD station on 2nd Street and laid it all out. He went through each document slowly, flagging items with post-it notes. When he finished, he leaned back. What you're describing falls under NRS 200.5092, exploitation of a vulnerable adult. Your parents are both over 60. If your father's letter and the IOUs hold up, and if we can confirm Boone's lending operation is unlicensed, this is a prosecutable case. He paused. But I need a victim statement. A sworn affidavit from one of your parents, ideally your father, confirming these transactions were coerced or obtained through undue influence. Without that, these documents are suggestive, not conclusive. I understood. Paper doesn't talk. People do. That afternoon, I filed for a temporary protective order against Dylan through Washoe County. NRS 33.018 allows temporary orders without the respondent present if there's documented evidence of threat. I also submitted paperwork for kinship foster care through Washoe County Human Services. And I called the Legal Aid Center to ask about emergency guardianship. The attorney there said, if the father is arrested and the mother is absent, your standing as the nearest stable relative is strong. But we need the arrest first. Everything depended on finding my parents. Everything depended on my father being willing to speak. Day 9. I was pouring coffee at 6 in the morning when my phone buzzed. A text from Dad. Fernley, Western Motel, room 14. Then a second message. Don't tell your mother I told you. Fernley is a small town 2 hours east on I-80, past the Truckee River Canyon, past the desert flats where nothing grows but sage and bitterness. I called Ruth and asked if Jaden could stay with her for the day. She said yes, without asking why. I drove east with the windows down and the radio off. The Western Motel was a single-story strip along the highway. 16 rooms, a vending machine, a parking lot with cracked asphalt, and 3 cars. I found room 14 and knocked. My father opened the door. He looked 10 years older than the last time I'd seen him. Unshaved, thin, wearing the same flannel I remembered from Thanksgiving. Behind him, my mother sat on the edge of the bed staring at the television. It was off. Dad. Jackson. We stood there for a moment, the way men do when there's too much to say and no good way to start. I stepped inside. The room smelled like motel soap and stale takeout. I looked at my mother. Jaden's been with me for 9 days. He's okay. He's safe. She turned. Her eyes were swollen. Jaden. She said his name like she was tasting something she thought she'd lost. She didn't ask about Dylan. That absence told me more than any answer could have. My father sat down in the desk chair and put his hands on his knees. You found the box. I found everything. The storage unit too. Silence. Then my mother stood. You don't understand. Dylan was forced into this. Garrett forced... I cut her off. Garrett loaned Dylan money because Dylan asked for it. Nobody held a gun to Dylan's hand and put it on a card table. She stared at me. Then, quietly, like a prayer she couldn't stop reciting. He just needs one more chance. I pulled out my phone and showed my mother the photograph I'd taken of Jaden's drawing, the house with no door, the 2 tall figures standing outside. She covered her mouth with her hand. The left hand, the one with the bare finger where her wedding ring used to be. She didn't say anything. She didn't have to. I looked at my father. Jaden told me what happened. In pieces. The way a 5-year-old remembers things. He said Daddy came to the house and asked Grandma for a paper. Grandma said no. Daddy threw the lamp. Hank closed his eyes. He said the man with the loud truck came after. The man who talked quiet. He said that was scarier. When someone talks quiet and you can still hear them everywhere. My father put his face in his hands. When he looked up, his eyes were wet. Dylan came Tuesday night. He wanted the deed. Said he'd promised Garrett he could get it. That the house would cover everything. Your mother said no. First time she'd said no to him in 5 years. He went through the house like a storm. Every drawer, every cabinet. Garrett stood in the kitchen and watched. Didn't touch anything. Just said, "You have 48 hours?" After they left, your mother packed a bag. She wanted to run. But Jackson... His voice cracked. She forgot Jaden was in the closet. The boy was so quiet. She thought he was with Dylan. She didn't realize until we were already on the highway, and by then she was too afraid to go back. She called Ruth the next morning and asked her to check, but Ruth's phone went to voicemail. I looked at my mother. She was staring at the floor. You left a 5-year-old alone in a house that had just been torn apart. She whispered. I thought he was with his father. His father, I said, is the one who tore it apart. I didn't raise my voice. I'd spent too many years in situations where calm was the only tool that worked. I sat on the edge of the other bed and laid it out. Here's what's going to happen. You're coming back to Reno. You'll stay at my apartment. Dad. You're going to the police station tomorrow morning to give a sworn statement to Detective Morales. He has the documents. He has the IOUs, the pawn receipts, the letter you wrote. What he needs is your voice. My father nodded. Slow, heavy, like a man putting down something he'd been carrying for too long. My mother stood up. If Dylan gets arrested, then Dylan faces the consequences of what Dylan did. For the first time in 5 years. You can't ask me to testify against my own son. I'm not asking you to testify against anyone. I'm asking you to protect your grandson. If you don't cooperate, CPS is going to ask why a 5-year-old was abandoned for a week in a ransacked house. They won't be asking me that question. They'll be asking you. She flinched. I wasn't trying to hurt her. I was stating facts. The same way I'd state the wind speed at a fire line, not to scare anybody, but because the numbers don't negotiate. My father stood. Get your things, Lorraine. She looked at him, then at me. Something passed behind her eyes. Not agreement, exactly, but the exhaustion of a woman who'd been holding up a ceiling that was never going to stop falling. She reached for her bag. I picked up my keys. On the way out, I held the door for my mother. She passed close enough that I could see her left hand, fingers bare, the skin slightly indented where the ring had sat for 40 years. The drive back to Reno was 2 hours of highway and silence. Hank sat in the passenger seat watching the desert scroll past. Lorraine sat in the back, wrapped in her jacket, hands in her lap. I watched her in the rearview mirror. Twice I saw her glance down at something below the seatback. I said nothing. At the apartment, I set them up. Couch for Hank, air mattress in the living room corner for Lorraine, Jaden in my bedroom in the race car bed I'd bought at the Goodwill on Audi Boulevard 2 days earlier. Jaden ran to Lorraine when he saw her. She held him so tight I thought she'd break. For a moment, she looked like the grandmother I remembered, the one who made lemon bars and sang hymns off-key. Then she put Jaden down and retreated to the kitchen without making eye contact with me. That night, after everyone was asleep, I picked up my mother's phone from the kitchen counter. She'd left it charging. No passcode. She'd never figured out how to set one. I opened her messages. There it was, sent at 4:17 p.m., while we were on I-80 somewhere between Fernley and the Truckee River Canyon. To Dylan. Baby, Jackson knows everything. Your father is going to the police tomorrow. You should leave Reno. I'm so sorry. I took a screenshot, sent it to my own phone, put hers back. Then I walked out to the balcony and stood in the cold air, looking at the lights of downtown Reno scattered across the valley floor. The casinos, the hotels, the neon promises that had swallowed my brother whole. I wasn't angry at my mother. I was past anger. She'd spent 40 years trying not to become her own mother, the woman who'd walked away from an alcoholic husband and left 11-year-old Lorraine to fend for herself. And in trying so hard not to abandon her child, she'd abandoned everyone else. I was on the phone with Detective Morales by 6:15 the next morning. My mother sent Dylan a warning last night. He knows we're cooperating with you. He may run or he may escalate. Either way, we're on a clock now. Morales absorbed this without surprise. Can you get your father to the station this morning? We'll be there by 9. I drove Hank downtown in silence. He stared out the window, and at one point he said, I should have done this 2 years ago. I didn't disagree. At the station, Hank sat across from Morales and a recorder and told everything. 5 years of debt, the pawn receipts, the I owe us, Garrett Boone's visits. First polite, then insistent, then threatening. The night Dylan came with Garrett and tore the house apart looking for the deed, the 48-hour ultimatum, the flight to Fernley. Hank signed the affidavit. His hand was steady. Whatever weakness had kept him silent for years, it wasn't in the room that morning. Morales laid out the charges he'd recommend to the DA: exploitation of a vulnerable adult under NRS 200.5092, a Category B felony; coercion under NRS 207.190, and for the Jaden situation, child endangerment under NRS 200.508. Arrest warrant will take 24 to 48 hours, Morales said. In the meantime, keep your family close and don't engage with Dylan or Boone directly. I nodded. Then I drove to the legal aid office and filed for emergency temporary guardianship of Jaden under NRS 159A. The attorney reviewed my application, Hank's affidavit, and the CPS emergency placement paperwork I'd been carrying since day one. You have standing, she said. If the father is charged, this moves fast. Everything was lining up, but my mother had given Dylan a head start, and I didn't know what he'd do with it. Ruth called me that afternoon. Her voice was tight, controlled. The voice of a woman who'd spent decades giving bad news in emergency rooms and had never unlearned the cadence. There's a truck, Jackson. Black Silverado. Drove past your parents' house twice in the last hour. Slow. Real slow. I told her to lock her doors and stay inside. She said, I was already inside. I've been watching since Tuesday. I called Morales immediately. He said what I expected. The warrant was still processing. 24 hours. Maybe less. I drove back to the apartment. Hank was sitting at the kitchen table, coffee untouched, staring at the wall. He looked up when I came in. "There's something else," he said. I sat down. "Dylan told Garrett that your mother and I would sign over the deed. He made that promise before he even asked us. Garrett loaned him another $20,000 on the strength of that promise, money Dylan burned through in a week." The number hit me like a second wave. So Garrett isn't just owed the original $35,000. He's owed $55,000. Plus interest. My father wrapped both hands around his cold mug. "When your mother said no to the deed, Dylan didn't just lose his leverage with us. He lost his leverage with Garrett. A man like Boone doesn't absorb a loss like that. He redistributes it." I understood then. Garrett wasn't going to stop at phone calls and slow drive-bys. He needed the deed, or he needed payment, and the only palmer with any remaining assets was my father. Or me. "They'll come here," I said. Not a question. Hank nodded. "Your brother knows where you live," Lorraine told him. Of course she did. I spent the next 3 hours moving pieces into place. First call, Tony Vargas. "I need Lorraine and Jaden at your place tonight. No connection to the Palmer name, no paper trail. Can you do that?" Tony didn't hesitate. "Bring them by 6. Second, I packed a bag for Jaden. Clothes, crayons, his stuffed bear, the drawing pad he'd been filling all week. I explained to him that he was going to stay with Mr. Tony for a sleepover, and that Ruth from next door would be there too. He accepted this with the terrifying composure of a child who'd learned not to ask why adults rearranged his world. Third, Lorraine. She was standing in the kitchen doorway when I came out of the bedroom with Jaden's bag. "What are you doing?" "Moving you and Jaden somewhere safe." "This is ridiculous, Jackson. Dylan wouldn't—" "Mom." I set the bag down. "You called Dylan. You told him Dad was going to the police. You told him to leave Reno. If Dylan showed that message to Garrett, Garrett knows we're cooperating with law enforcement, which means Garrett's timeline just got a lot shorter. If they come here tonight, I don't want Jaden in this apartment." She opened her mouth. Closed it. "You gave Dylan our position, Mom. I'm not angry about it. I understand why you did it. But I'm not going to let the same instinct that made you protect Dylan put Jaden at risk." She looked at me for a long time. Then she picked up her purse. In the car, Jaden sat between us. Lorraine held his hand. She didn't speak the entire drive to Sparks. When I dropped them off, I told Morales, "If they come to my apartment, I'll call. How fast can you have a unit here?" 15 minutes. Make it 10. The apartment felt different without Jaden in it. Quieter, but not the good kind. Hank sat on the sofa. I sat at the kitchen table. The television was off. We could hear the highway through the thin walls, the distant growl of trucks heading east toward Salt Lake. "I'm sorry, Jackson." I looked at him. His face was gray under the kitchen light. "I knew your mother was wrong. I knew it the first time she pulled money from savings for Dylan. I could feel it in my gut. The way you feel a bearing going bad in an engine. You can hear the wrongness before you can name it. But your mother?" He rubbed his face with both hands. "She grew up without a father. Her mother left when Lorraine was 11, packed a bag, and took a bus to Portland and never came back. Your grandmother decided she couldn't save her husband, so she saved herself. And Lorraine spent the rest of her life swearing she'd never do that. Never abandon a child. No matter what." He looked at me. "Every time you told her the truth about Dylan, she heard her own mother's voice saying it was time to give up. And she couldn't. She physically could not." I sat with that. "You didn't lose your wife by telling the truth, Dad. You lost your family by staying quiet." He nodded. Slowly, like a man agreeing with his own verdict.